Thank you to all of you for being here today for the first Lancashire Music Association meeting, the first Lancashire Music Summit. So why are we here? Well, I would argue that music serves the common good. To borrow from Plato, rhythm and harmony are able to penetrate the soul. I have a feeling everyone would agree with that. Hence, a place with more music is a better place to live. So kind of that's part of the mission, that we amplify the relationship that Lancashire has with music. And we consider the future of music for Lancashire, how we might capture cultural and economic value. So these are questions that we're going to be exploring today. You can see here a map. I'd like to thank our friends who we've been collaborating with from Liverpool University and others. This is the idea of mapping our infrastructure and knowing what we have in Lancashire. I think we're going to explore that a bit more in one of the panels later. But if you're operating a venue, it's probably on there. This map is something, it's not available yet, but it's something that we will be developing. But our towns and cities are home to complex ecosystems made up of independent relationships and interdependent relationships. And to illustrate, venues need relevant, high-quality content to entice audiences, and artists need places to develop craft, try new ideas, and develop audiences. By joining the ecosystem up, we can potentially create a more complete ecosystem with wider scope and potentially unlock more strategic thinking, enabling new models of practice. So these are things that we're looking to do with the Lancashire Music Association. And we'll hear more about this stuff later on. So I'm going to just hand you over to Anne Harrison, who probably needs no introduction, but there's a fantastic book called Music the Business, which Anne wrote, and Anne is a leading British music lawyer. Over to you, Anne. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a very warm welcome to you and to this first panel. It feels like a really auspicious occasion to me. So it is really, really heartening to see so many here today. You've got to make your voices heard. Tell people what it is that will make things easier for you to stay local and to make a functioning business here. I would like you, if you could, to expand a little bit on the importance of knowing about the industry that you're coming into.
Absolutely. So I'm coming to this event certainly with an educational perspective and thinking about how we're educating children and young people in terms of an industry perspective. And one of the things we were looking at is how we're supporting routes into industry, and also how schools support that transition from education into industry. And one of the things that I was particularly interested in was about a real lack of education in terms of opportunities and jobs and routes into the music industry from a secondary education perspective. One of the things I did in terms of preparation for this panel was that we run a secondary music teachers group, a closed Facebook group. And I asked, just out of interest in that group, if people could tell us if they are in their secondary school, if they're teaching specific units of work on the music industry. And because I was thinking, I've got anecdotal evidence that actually the majority of secondary schools aren't doing this. So I only had 15 responses out of 180. So, like I said, it's not wholesale, but from those 15 responses of whether they did teach a standalone unit of work, whether that's a half term or a term, the answer was no for 100% of those respondents. I know there isn't much happening in terms of education and young people being taught about, in music lessons, the opportunities that there are available in the music industry. I think that's an important starting point, because if we're starting from a point where we're trying to get more people into the industry, we want them to stay in Lancashire, they've been educated in Lancashire, they bring a lot of skills, a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge in that area. We don't want them leaving the county to be able to then go and work in the music industry. We want them to stay in the county and make those, as Tony mentioned earlier, those towns and cities more culturally vibrant and have more music, more culture happening across the county as well.
I teach at BIM in the spring term in Birmingham, and spring term is when all the further education colleges do their music business. But what I have noticed is a big gap in knowledge between people coming from school into further education. But do you think there's anything from the existing classes that are taught that could lead people into being more aware of the opportunities that are in this industry? Because we tend to focus on performance and writing and playing instruments, but this industry supports a huge number of people in order for those creatives to actually do their thing. So is there a way that that could be the ground prepared for, do you think?
So if we want to start to change the opportunity of having an education about the music business or the music industry, that has to happen prior to losing those children and young people at the end of Key Stage 3. So trying to link up industry with education in a much more real way, in terms of having units of work that we can give to secondary teachers to look at and try to incorporate into the music curriculum. It's that sort of tangible look at not just performing in that industry, but there's a vast array of roles that you can do, as you're in a good example of, within the music industry. It doesn't necessarily involve writing a song or performing.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. David, I was talking to you briefly beforehand, and you obviously have a connection with you, Clan. You were saying about how the further education, it's dropped away a little bit in your time, you were telling me.
Yeah, so I think from my experience of owning a music store, as an example, when I first started that store in 1989, the 4 universities in Lancashire that I'm kind of more aware of, which, even though it sounds strange, University of Cumbria has got a campus in Lancaster, so that's in Lancashire, obviously. So University of Cumbria, Lancaster University, UCLan, Edghill, all offered further education, well, higher education, undergraduate degrees in music. And as far as I know now, none of them do. And that is absolutely, in my opinion, it's terrible. For my business and for my the businesses that I'm involved with, it's a problem, because people used to come to Lancashire, they would study music, even if they didn't go into the music industry. They would work locally, they'd be interested in music, they'd be, going to record shops or music stores or gigs and venues, but we're losing that. I think at the Masters, which obviously Tony delivers a thing in music business, and I've helped on that course, it's fantastic. And in a sense, if these students end up having to go out of county, they can come back and then get a real experience.
The next layer that I wanted to explore was to do with the team that you need to put around yourself to make a success of something.
I had very, very good advice. Accountants, lawyers, and right from the beginning. And I think that's really important. I think you can get as much information as you can as well, lots of reading, but I think when that word exclusive and when that contract comes, I think you should really go. And not somebody that your mum and dad knows that maybe did the conveyancing on their house when they moved, a specialist. Because it can actually, if you don't get it right in the early days, it can definitely trip you up.
So whenever you're entering into any legal undertakings, you need to get some advice, and I think that would apply anywhere, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I was going to say, any of you with the Musicians Union or your students, you get a really cheap rate to join the MU, and they've got like a legal service where they can review stuff for a certain amount of hours for free for you. So that can be well worth just joining the MU for. And on our website, we've got a list of music accountants and solicitors who will be willing to see you for up to 2 hours for free to give you initial advice. We've got ones all around the country as well, so if you want to speak to a northern one, we've got quite a few in Manchester as worth speaking to, as well as that.
Oh, that's great, yeah. And from the songwriting side, there's an organisation that some of you might have known as BASCA, it is now called the Academy. They have a similar referral system. But we actually have a lawyer on the panel with us this afternoon. So, and he is local. So let's hear from Ciaran as to how important you think it is to get proper advice.
Well, I suppose I could just start by simply affirming and agreeing with what the other panelists have said. I think the law is something that maybe scares people, maybe intimidates people. The analogy I sometimes use is that the law is a bit like fire. It's a good servant, but a bad master. And if you get it wrong, or if you don't take any legal advice, you can get your fingers burnt. And the history of the music business is obviously littered with examples of people who have entered into bad contracts, some really famous people, and who had difficulty extricating themselves from them. Basically, in terms of the legal perspective, the music business is largely based on contracts, which give rise to rights and obligations. So you need to understand your rights and your obligations, as well as the rights and obligations of the other side. So yes, it is important to take legal advice earlier on. Your legal advice has got to be practical. It's got to be tailored to the client's needs and expectations. And you've got to manage the client's expectations as well.
We have quite a structured industry in this country, and it can sometimes appear like a real maze as to who does what and where do they all fit in, and there's acronyms everywhere that, you know, there's new ones coming up every week, and I think, which one is that now? Is that dance music? Or, yeah, where do they belong? You represent probably the biggest and oldest of all the associations, don't you? So do you want to tell us a little bit more about what PRS does?
Yeah, so PRS is celebrating its 110th anniversary this year. So we are one of the biggest oldest organisations in the UK. Last year we paid out over £943 million to our members. So there's a lot of money in this part of the music industry, and a lot of people don't know who we are. For instance, I was in lots of bands in my younger years, moved down to London to make it big with my band, split up, and I was like, I need to get a job in music. Found this organisation called the PRS MCPS Music Alliance. I was like, who is this? But it's got music in its name. Applied for the job thinking I'll do this for a couple of months until my band's career takes off, and then 17 years later I'm still working at the company that's now called PRS Music. Yeah, so we kind of touch all facets of the music industry, from labels to venues to songwriters, composers, and music publishers. So we exist essentially. We're owned by our members, governed by our members. So if you join PRS, you've got a say in how we run. You get to vote every year in our AGMs to say what our rules are, how we distribute our money. Yeah, we're essentially there to make sure our members are paid whenever their songs or compositions are broadcast on radio, TV, streamed, downloaded, played live, when they're synchronized into film, TV, computer games. And yeah, AI is going to be a very interesting one to see how that's going to be compensated.
Is your industry, can you tell us, are they working behind the scenes on those deals?
Yeah, so a lot of the organisations, so there's a kind of umbrella organisation called UK Music that brings a lot of people together, such as PRS, the Ivers Academy, the Musicians Union, there's Live. We'll kind of get together and try and have an agreed approach on how subjects such as AI should be tackled. And different people have always got different angles that they're coming to. So big thing in recent years is like streaming, where we're speaking it from a songwriter's perspective. We want songwriters to be more rewarded for streams, but then you've also got labels who are saying, actually, we invest all this money, we think that everything was working fine as it is, because likes of Universal, Sony, they're probably quite happy with how much they're getting from streaming, whereas songwriters, not so much.
I would like my panelists, I said earlier, 4 things that maybe we could take forward. So I've got 4 panelists here. Can I have from each of you what one thing you think would make a difference?
The thing that made a difference for me, I think, was my mentors. I had some great mentors, and I would ask for help.
Kind of similar, I'd say kind of collaboration is key. You never know who you're sat next to.
Well, I suppose I mentioned infrastructure a moment ago, so I would say infrastructure, but also the human infrastructure as well. So knowing where and how and from whom to seek advice at the appropriate time.
I think going on from what I said earlier is much better links between industry and education, and informing children and young people from an early age about the opportunities available in the music industry. And like we've said, there are a vast array of opportunities. You don't just have to be a singer or performer.
The social consumption of music is where people come together to experience music. That would include festivals, concerts. These things happen in venues, in clubs. But there's a whole range of places that present music, social music experiences. Matt, could you talk a little bit about the benefits, how the Liverpool City Region Music Association, some of the things that it's been able to do? And
so it's been established for just over 5 years. It's a collection of a range of voices from across the music sector within the region. There's 22 members at any one time. It's voluntary, and it brings us together to talk about the challenges that the Liverpool music sector faces across from, we have a certain band associated with us, which brings lots of benefits, but also brings challenges in terms of narrative. We have the same challenges as yourselves in terms of venue stock and sort of venues being able to thrive and survive, and we do quite well there generally. And so there's a range of voices around the room. Our job is to speak to the Combined Authority and the Metro Mayor and try and drive policy change to advantage the sector. Key thing we did really early on was get agents of change on Liverpool City Council to recognise agents of change in their planning law. We haven't got time to go into what agents of change is, but really it's a way of protecting existing venues, and that really helped in supporting some venues to survive over the last couple of years when they were threatened by property development. More recently, took about 18 months to get done, but we got the return of night buses post-pandemic to support our live sector. And again, it's one of the things that where the mapping stuff that I do comes in, with the university sort of sat between the sector and local authorities and combined authority, being able to hear those voices together, package that up as a business case, present it to the combined authority, and then apply subtle pressure over a period of time to get something done that individually none of those constituencies would have been able to get done on their own, but collaboratively it works really well.
So the Ferret's had the Ferret is a grassroots music venue. It is the sort of place where new music is incubated, new bands and artists get to learn their craft, try their material on audiences, where scenes are developed. You've benefited from the relationship with, a coordinated organisation such as the Music Venue Trust.
Yes, absolutely. We have. I don't know how many people know, but the Ferret was quite under threat. This is going back 2 or 3 years. Our building was going to be, basically the Ferret's in a larger mill building, and the landlord decided to put the building up for sale. It was at a price where it really wasn't feasible for the Ferret to buy the building on its own. I think it was 695,000 originally. So we're in a bit of we're in a very tight corner, and we weren't quite sure what was going to happen to the Ferret. And the Music Venue Trust fortuitously, as it turned out, we're in the process of putting together a package where they buy music venues in towns and cities outside of the Londons and Bristols and Manchesters or whatever, where a kind of grassroots music venue really matters to the kind of town. And it was a long process. It was a difficult purchase, but we got there in the end. So now we have a kind of benevolent landlord, one that kind of, that we can sort of deal with and kind of work and kind of develop the whole place, the Music Venue Trust, and Jay is part of the Music Venue Trust, who help facilitate all of this.
Jay, could you tell us a bit more about the Music Venue Trust, please?
Sure. Wow, where do we start? I mean, my role started at the beginning of the pandemic when they recruited regional coordinators. So I was the regional coordinator that started speaking to the Ferret and venues in the Northwest in sort of April 2020. But the work I largely do, my bit of it is right at the coalface. I largely work in the emergency service for England with my colleague Lloyd, who's sat at the table on the back there. And venues come to us with challenges, and we're trying to find kind of meaningful solutions to them. One of the big challenges for the sector is that over 90% of them have got a private landlord, and those landlords have got very different ambitions for those spaces than the operators tend to have. So it makes absolute sense that we try to kind of move those away from those landlords who don't really care what's happening inside that building, and put them into the hands of the people who matter, the people who care, and that's the operators and the community, this community. And so the first one that we set up a second charity, Music Venue Properties, and so it's a benevolent landlord, but also some community ownership aspects to it. So the first one we managed to purchase was a Snug in Atherton, which is a suburb of Wigan. And the second one was the wonderful Ferret over the road. And the third one literally just happened, which is the Bunkhouse in Swansea. And so those things are now protected. There'll be no rent increases. I mean, in 2023, the average rent increase for a grassroots music venue was 38%. When you've got a sector that's dancing on the cusp of sustainability with a 5% profit margin, that's a really difficult pill to swallow.
If there was the Ferrets on its own, facing that challenge, what do you think would have happened, Jeremy?
Well, I mean, inevitably we'd have either had to close or potentially move to another location in town. Whether we'd have been able to find another location or not, I don't know. I mean, the Ferret's a non-profit, and we might well have got to the point where it's like, what? Yeah. This isn't really working. We're going to have to go and do something else, and then we'd have lost a kind of a fairly precious resort, because there's not. Lancashire as a whole isn't really blessed with an awful lot of kind of live music venues, certainly dedicated ones.
Other people, I mean, I know there was support from the civic institutions, so Preston City Council, so that, it's a community. There's a whole community thing around this.
Yes, certainly. I mean, the crowdfunding we did as well, people were enormously generous. It was, it went far back, back than our wildest dreams, really. And we got there in the end, but that was thanks to a lot of people. A lot of people put a lot of time in it. A lot of bands played for free and donated their, the revenue from the evening. It was great.
It's an ecosystem, isn't it, really? And that people really care about it, to a degree that the local authority is supporting. We've got Rich Dyer here, who has set up a really, 25 years of Skiddle. Really? So this is an international business that has grown out of Lancashire. Rich, would you tell us a bit about Skiddle?
2001, myself and Ben, we met online, and we started to realise we had a love for going out, and we created a website that enabled event organisers to add their own listings to a website, which sounds very boring now, but back then, if you wanted to promote an event, you had to either get your wallpaper paste out, or you had to fax Mixmag about 3 months before with your lineup and hope that you didn't change or cancel anything. And Ben built a web form, and you press go, and it was on the internet straight away, which doesn't sound that clever now, but back then, you know, we were almost pre-Google in a lot of ways, and we enabled event organisers to be able to promote sites. So from those two hotspots of Preston and Carlisle, we very quickly had listings for London and Birmingham and Newcastle appearing on the site, and more people started using the internet as well. 4 or 5 years later, we convinced Creamfields and a place called Sankey's in Manchester that we could do ticketing better than what they were doing online, because what used to happen back then was you buy a ticket for Sankey's, and because you bought it online, you were in a different queue, it took longer to get in and it cost you more. And we're like, we need to rip that up, we need to change those rules. Creamfields said you can sell 50 tickets, and long story short, we sold about 3,000 and had to meet Scott Barton at a service station with a big bundle of cash. And now, you know, nearly 25 years later, here we are. We've got 4 offices, got over 100 staff. Mr. Forbett of the Ferret used to work for us back in the day, before he got a proper job. And we, you know, we sell millions of tickets. We're second or third in line. We're never going to compete with Ticketmaster because they're owned by Live Nation and the answer to shareholders. And at that end of the industry, they don't care about the industry. They care about the money. And it's as simple as that. We tend to work then with a lot of independents, a lot of the bigger promoters, a lot of the smaller groups, and we'll sell tickets for anything, you know, literally from yoga at a village hall right through to
this event.
This
here.
event right here. And you know, last we did Milton Keynes Bowl chasing status earlier on this year and did 45,000 tickets in 22 minutes. Selling tickets, the very basics of it is the face value goes to the event organizer. That's then distributed amongst the show to the artists, etc. We get the booking fee. Quite often on the bigger shows, we've also got to give some of the booking fee to the event organizer. They love that. And then we have to somehow put a building over our head, answer the phone, pay the VAT man, everything else out of a percentage of the booking fee. I'm not crying poverty. We do it well. We've been doing it a long time, and every deal is different. But we pass the full face value of the ticket itself, plus sometimes a little bit more, to the event organizer, and that comes with risks. You know, we had 4 shows this year go down quite badly because of weather, and you've got people like Martin Lewis sat on the telly going, "Oh, just get a chargeback." Now that chargeback comes, the bank don't cover the chargebacks. They take it from the retailer, and when you're the retailer and you're chasing an event organizer, you know, all of a sudden, what the percentage of the booking fee, so let's be very simple, a £10 ticket, we might see 50p of, you know, but you multiply that up, the customer comes to us for it all. But, you know, Ticketmaster, they're at the other end of the scale. You know, it's Ticketmaster, Live Nation, they're the same company, they're the same thing. And then what makes up a lot of these shows is lots of people that own everything. So, yeah, they definitely can't cry poverty.
But I was actually at an NTIA ambassador meeting the other day, and you know, it's incredible the things that the NTIA do. Could you tell us a bit about it? And but I thought it'd be interesting. There's this idea of legislation, you know, that if you're operating a business, there's all kinds of things that are, you know, as a sector, that it has to deal with. And you become like a conduit for that information, but also you are also there to try and resolve issues, you know, and represent. I've kind of answered the question, haven't I? Mike, could you elaborate?
Thanks for answering that for me, Tony.
Thank you.
The NTIA realistically is it's a trade body first, with just under 11,000 members across the UK. We've got commissions in Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, where we have separate boards that feed into our main board. But in real simple terms, we're a lobbyist activist group. The lobbying takes place where we sit with all the government departments, from Department of Business and Trade, DCMS, which is the Culture Department, Home Office, And to be quite honest, during the pandemic, I was including as many times as I was kicked out of ministerial meetings because of me telling the truth and being quite direct with ministers, particularly on some of the support that was sort of out there. But we are known probably more likely for things like the campaign around saving Brixton Academy, where we got something like 30,000 representation letters to the local authority within about 2 weeks. And we're also known for something called Letters Dance, which is a campaign driving for funding to be given to electronic music and sound system culture when DCMS during the pandemic decided not to be as clear in supporting everything, including live music, for us as an industry. We work very hard, not only on a regional base, and we've got some 80 odd ambassadors which represent within cities and towns across the country, and they're quite active in terms of understanding the sort of nuances within the locality. And Tony being one of the that network of people, and as you heard, is part of a meeting where we give updates. But what we do very well is lobby very hard. You know, the budget is coming on the 30th of October. We were involved heavily with things like Martin's Law. I sit on the GCHQ group for Martin's Law, so we've managed to get that legislation through without it being too onerous. We sit with people like Jonathan Reynolds and Rachel Reeves and etc. in terms of having some very robust conversations around what we want to see in the future of legislation around licensing and how planning is going to change. And I also sit on things like the senior leadership group for the Mayor of London, and Sasha Lord is our chair of our board. So and there's a few people on the panel that I work with. Matt and Aaron was one of the sort of founding members of the NTIA in the early days, and still sort of involved to a point. Yeah, that's what we do.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. So over to Aaron. So you started not in Lancashire, but in a northern provincial town, and you basically grew a business that's worth maybe around £100 million. You know, can you tell us a little? You know, there's this idea of where we're kind of at the point we're at now, but the prospect of growing and developing something of significant scale. You know, you did it almost single-handedly. You know, tell us about how you did it and your management team.
Yeah, so I guess my first experience really was in Oldham, which is in Lancashire. My first venue was a club called Tokyo Oldham. We opened that in 1997, and it was very much the belief that it was owning a nightclub and a live music venue was very much like being a promoter, but multiple nights of the week. And it definitely wasn't. That first venue was an absolute learning curve. And just as we cracked that one, we went to an equally impoverished town, which was Ashton-under-Lyne on the outskirts of Manchester. And that was super difficult. So then we did it again. And now somehow we've ended up with 47. I guess the way we've done it is we've bought venues quite cleverly. So we're one part property company and one part operator, which then means that we're our own landlords. So when other landlords are becoming difficult in the bigger cities, we can be gentle with ourselves because we own the building we operate in, and we're building a culture within that. And it's very much about focusing on that culture and driving that forward, trying to create this kind of circular economy. You know, the UK and the UK government often forget that music is still one of our best exports globally. You know, we create music like no other country does. And without venues like the Ferret or venues like Digital in Newcastle or Think Tank, you know, we're not going to get those new artists. We're not going to get the new Ed Sheeran, the new Adele. You know, we need to create this music. These venues become the tapestry of our communities, and if we lose them, and we're losing an awful lot of them at a really fast pace, that's never going to come back. And then where will we be?
Yeah, do we lose 125 last year?
Yeah, 125 either closed altogether or ceased putting on live music. Yeah.
So you know, there's a real, you know, there's this thought that if everyone comes together and pulls together, you know, we're stronger. You know, we can underpin these activities. So what would you do if you were starting again now? how would you approach it?
I feel like we're starting again every single week. Ever since COVID, you know, we're in such a different world. It's the kind of world of pivots. So every month goes by, we're kind of changing the dynamic on what we're doing, what we're focusing on. So I think it's about being entrepreneurial, being creative, and looking where the next thing is coming from and trying to jump on that quite early. But it's certainly a lot harder now than it has ever been. I think our last 24 months has been the hardest of our last 24 years. And it's not getting any easier. Costs are going up, attendance is going down, cost of living is biting hard. The agents aren't really feeling that, so the agents still want loads of money for bands, and that's quite difficult to encourage them to adapt their fees to play smaller venues where they can create a cultural impact in the smaller towns. That's super difficult.
So we can incubate and develop our own in Lancashire and then export them and, you know...
Absolutely.
You know, build those connections. So, which we are doing really, you know, which is great. I love the fact that we have phenomenal... I mean, they are significant businesses, the Ferret and the Continental, but absolutely, you know, at the core of them is passion and creativity and artistry. I love the fact that you can build almost a wouldn't it be good if idea. We don't have this, we would like it, and you know, that's entrepreneurial thinking, you know, really creative thinking to build a platform like Skiddle. You know, is there any one last thought or piece of advice that I can get from each of our panelists?
Probably one of the biggest challenges that we've got, and some of the work that MVT have been highlighting on a live perspective, is the grassroots movement. One of the things that we're recognizing is grassroots is really important and funding that is vital. But we've got to start thinking about complete ecosystem. And one of the biggest voids in venues is in that mid-tier venue space. So when you talk about grassroots music venues, what we're doing is we're going to produce and start to develop fantastic talent coming through, but they haven't got the ability to refine their craft in the sort of 8,000-9,000 capacity venues upwards. And that's where we've got the sort of bigger void. So there is definitely something that we're working on at the moment which will make a difference. The work that MVT are doing, similarly, I mean, we've just actually raised a £100 million fund to actually buy freeholds and lease back to SME businesses. So we're doing a similar thing, but we are focused more on electronic. We are accommodating for live, but obviously live is accommodated for quite well. So from our perspective, our biggest concern is that whole ecosystem. We need to start thinking about electronic and live music artists, whether you're a band or a DJ, being able to go through that process and refine your craft all the way up. Because all we're seeing at the moment is you've got grassroots venues, there's a void, and then the limited amount of people who get the opportunity to go to Highest Point or Warehouse Project or something like that. We're missing huge amounts of talent.
Matt,
to build on that, really, the best way to get things done is from ground up, meeting top down, and somewhere in the middle there's a sweet spot that enables things to be resolved, I think, both at a regional level and then at a national level. So we work with MVT through the music board, we work with Live, we work with all the national organisations. A lot of the problems are shared across the country. You can start to resolve them locally, you can learn off each other, but you resolve the problems locally, then it starts to address the national challenges as well.
Great, thank you. Rich, last thoughts, final thoughts? Just do it.
Just get on with it. Yeah, if you want to do something, you want to be in a band, just buy a guitar. You know, if you want to learn to mix, get some really, really cheap decks. And you don't need the top-end equipment. Just go out and just do stuff. You'll get somewhere.
Aaron? I kind of want to say no guts, no glory, mate, for you. But...
Well, it is kind of that, really. It's about having a passion and being entrepreneurial and thinking outside the box. When people say no, don't just agree with that. Just say, well, why not? Well, and then go and do it anyway and prove them wrong. You know, it's about having the balls to get out there and just do things, because that's the other way you're going to get noticed. If you just kind of sat there emailing people, we get bombarded with emails. That's no good. We want to see something that's got some flair and it's got some attention, something that's ultimately going to sell tickets and move people through venues.
Thank you. Jay?
I think probably just picking up on the Coldplay thing, that money is, it's going to take a while because obviously they've got to do the shows first. It's got to be mechanised and distributed. That money will go to grassroots venues, also go to grassroots promoters and artists. So there is a plan for that to kind of go out to the kind of wider ecosystem. But what I would say is, in that gap, what we're seeing is venues are in like a hope bubble, where, you know, the work that Lloyd and I do in the emergency service is essentially kind of trying to get venues out to a point where there is meaningful drip down funding from those ends, that part of the industry that's making gigantic profits. You know, that end of the industry in 2023 made more money than it's ever made before in the history of everything. You know, and the grassroots sector had the worst year worst year ever. And so this kind of, what I would say is, you know, I probably don't need to say to people here that you should go out and support your grassroots music venues, because hopefully we're all complicit in the work. But certainly, I think, you know, what we're looking at now is trying to get those venues over the next year.
Jeremy, you and your team, your local heroes, you know, mean that sincerely. Your final thoughts?
Well, I think just for us, I think it's just kind of get in touch, come down and get involved. I mean, today, Matt and Rapp, who book at the Continental and Ferret, are here. It's on the table at the back. So if anybody wants to speak to us about playing or just getting involved in any way they want to, please do afterwards.
Hi everyone, so I'm Marianne Barraclough and I'm the Executive Director at More Music. More Music is a community music organisation, a charity based in the West End of Morecambe, and we run lots and lots of creative programmes encouraging young musicians to build their craft and to experience working with professional musicians and to kind of launch them into their careers. We also have sessions for the widest range of our community to come into the building, to be creative, to make music, and to kind of see what that can bring them. So what benefits they can get from making music. We promote gigs and we do lots of work in schools, and we love to encourage young musicians coming through about the wide variety of roles that there are in the music industry, and to look at all those opportunities rather than just being the person who sings or is in the band. So that's something which we really care about as well.
I think what you do with More Music is a great example of what people have been talking about today. It's very grassroots, it's a very central hub, and it's usable for everybody, because there is a danger that music is locked out of lots of sectors of the community. In Morecambe, I mean, God bless Morecambe. It's hard there in Morecambe. There's not a lot of money in Morecambe, and you're in the West End of Morecambe, which is one of the poorest parts of Lancashire. And what you're doing there by your building there is actually creating a space where things can happen. I think that's important. Do you want to talk about what More Music does there?
Yeah, I think the connections that we have into the community are really important. So we try and offer a really broad range of ways into the building, and actually trying to make the building feel as welcoming and as accessible as possible. We really support young emerging bands to have their opportunities to form as bands, to develop their craft, and then to we then encourage them and support them to perform beyond More Music. But I think being based in Morecambe is a really interesting place in the West End of Morecambe. Ambition is generally quite low, and so we're doing everything we can to try and encourage people to find what it is that they love to do, whether that's music or whether that's something else. But by coming into the space and finding that spark of positivity and creativity, it could lead them on to anything, and that's what we try and do, certainly.
I mean, when people go in there, and it's great you open that door and give a space for people to get empowered, but do you talk to them about how to sustain a musical career and be based in Morecambe, so you don't necessarily have to move to the big city?
Yeah, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because opportunities are limited, but I think what we do is try and open up people's eyes to the very wide range of careers that are available in the industry, whether that's supporting some of the young people who've come through our programme then come work with us on mentoring programmes, so they can learn to be sound techs so that they can take those skills on, or learning about marketing or any of the other skills that go behind in the whole of the music industry. So we do everything we can to try and highlight those pathways. It's hard because actually a lot of the time we're hearing from young people that they're being discouraged. They're being told the music industry isn't viable. And so we're then fighting against that, working with young people to try and show them actually there is a vast range of roles that you can do out there. And it's just about trying to be really flexible and grasping all the opportunities that are presented, and then trying to find the thing that you're going to be passionate about and that's going to move you forward. So not always easy, but we do try.
So Chris, you, like a lot of people move, say from Morecambe to Manchester or to London. You've done it the other way around. You've moved from Manchester to Morecambe, haven't you?
I have, yeah. I've gone out to live on the coast and have a sea view and amazing sunsets. So I'm literally based around the corner from More Music. I've got a studio there. I've been in the music industry for 50 years. I've been round the block a few times, and I teach these days as well as mentoring and doing session stuff as well.
You do different roles. It's underlying this idea that it's not just getting paid to play drums, it's about teaching drums, mentoring people. And this,
I think that's the longevity of a career.
Yeah, this can be done anywhere.
You don't start. Yeah. I didn't start out thinking I'm going to be teaching drums down the line. I was just wanted to play in bands. I just wanted to play music. So I wasn't thinking about, I want to learn how to set the PA up or how to do the lights, because there was other people around doing that. So I was, my gig was being the drummer. And I was just focused on that. So I wasn't thinking, and I wasn't thinking about a career in the music industry either. I was just thinking about, I'm a musician, I would like to play music. And that was it. I wasn't there to think about making money or, I wasn't thinking I'm going to be still doing this in 20 years' time. It just so happens that I was. So you've got to put the work in, but then there's a lot of luck comes into play with the industry as well.
I mean, that's an interesting thing there, wasn't it? Because in the 70s, 80s, it wasn't looked on so much as a career option. And the idea that this could be a career is now, I think, everybody kind of expects it to be a career. And so they should, in a sense, but it's how do they
Why
do
should
that?
They?
Yeah.
Why should they?
Well, you
a lot of people aren't talented enough. A lot of people, there's talent and there's luck. Everybody thinks they should be able to sell loads of, or do lots of downloads on Spotify, but sometimes what you're putting out is crap. So why should it work? It's such a different industry nowadays from when I was kind of starting out, and I don't think there's that many venues to play these days for young bands. And I think particularly in Morecambe, there's loads of venues, loads of pubs with people there, but I'm not seeing 18, 19-year-old kids and people going down for the Monday night gig at this venue, and it doesn't matter which band is on. You go down because there's a gig on that night to see what's happening. I'm not seeing that.
So the culture's changed. I mean, are we in danger of trying to preserve an old culture, or is that old culture actually a valid culture in the 21st century?
I think it is. I think, I teach young musicians, and I've got teenagers that I've taught now for quite a while, and they're in up-and-coming bands. Some of them have moved to Manchester. They're coming through. They've got the same enthusiasm that I had when I was 18, 19, 20. And they're getting those gigs. They're getting out and hustling for the gigs. So I don't see it's any different if you're that age.
So is it a matter of still having to move to the city, which is what we're trying to stop here in a sense? Or do we work with the city?
You don't have to move to Manchester, no. I think, that's what I'm saying about having more of an infrastructure for the industry here, where there would be agents, there's promoters. I think things like the Ferret, I don't know these venues very well, but I think what they're doing is admirable. And if they're putting on young, unknown bands, then I applaud what they're doing, and some nights it's going to be empty a bit, and other nights and that's why you've got to have local bands that create a following, and then you can get maybe a network of they can play in Darwin one night, they can play in Blackburn the next, they can play in Morecambe the following night, and a bit of a circuit. Somebody should try and develop that.
So you're from the city, but you moved out. When I say out, I am from Lancashire originally, but you moved back to Lancashire, out to Lancashire. So why did you do that?
So I actually don't live in Lancashire. I live in Manchester, which I'm always very embarrassed to admit to people. But I actually don't think that affects my work too much, to be honest. I try to go to, if I can, I try to go to 2 or 3 gigs a week if I can, as far all over the place as I'm able to. So last week I was at one in Manchester, and then the following night I was in Blackpool, Preston the week before that, Lancaster before that. I did a trip to Barrow a few weeks ago to check out the metal scene there. I actually don't think the problem is as big as you may be suggesting it is. I think Lancashire has the infrastructure that we are suggesting it wants to have. There are venues all over the place, but the problem that I constantly encounter with artists and music lovers in this county in particular is that they don't actually know about what's happening basically 5 miles away from where they are. So if, for example, if we think about Manchester, obviously I'm from Salford, so I know Manchester fairly well. There are probably more venues on Oldham Street, if you're familiar with it, in the Northern Quarter, than there are in Lancashire. So if you know Oldham Street and you go to gigs on Oldham Street, then you automatically know, I don't know, 7 or 8 venues. We have Night and Day, The Castle, Gulliver's, Mountain Fred's, all that kind of thing. But in Lancashire, so there are probably as many venues on Oldham Street as there are in the rest of the county. So if you are from Darwin, then realistically your only option of going to go see a live show is Sunbird Records, which is a wonderful venue. If you haven't been, you should do. If you live in Lancaster, realistically, if it's not Cantina, there are other options as well. There are plenty of pubs and a great open mic scene in Lancaster, but Cantina is probably the place to go. And Cantina put on a lot of tribute stuff. If you're in Preston, we have the Ferret, we have the Continental, we have Choose Yard doing the odd thing here and there. But again, not a lot of options. But if you add all of that up, there is actually quite a lot. It's just about connecting it all together. So we're talking about, well, while we're comparing it to Manchester, is Neighbourhood this weekend? Yeah. So there's what, 10, 15, 20 venues all in Manchester, all doing 1 ticket entry to all those venues. I mean, it's great value for money, and a lot of bands won't tour through the Northwest because they're playing Neighbourhood, which is a problem in itself. But if that happened in Lancashire, the infrastructure is there to do a 20 venue event in Lancashire, but how would you possibly do it? Because the venues aren't 20 yards apart, they're 20 miles apart. So the whole thing has kind of exploded on one bigger map rather than a smaller one.
So somebody who sort of works with a lot of sort of bands in Lancashire on your radio show, what do people talk about the difficulties of having a sustainable musical career? Is it, like you're saying, everything's spread out quite a long way away, Manchester gets all the attention, they're locked on the outside, or is that just kind of myths? I mean, what do people sort of say that makes it difficult to have a sustainable musical career in Lancashire?
I mean, one solution a lot of people take is moving to Manchester. I don't think that's a very good idea, to be honest, because there are a lot of people there already. You're competing with a lot more people. It's going to be harder to get people's attention. Take a band like British Birds, if you've heard of British Birds. If you're unfamiliar with British Birds, then I would recommend you listen to them as soon as you can. They're from Chorley. I think they've kind of, they've really kind of torn up the blueprint in a way of how you can get people's attention without playing in front of the inverted commas biggest audience you can find. They played Atherton, Horwich, Halifax, Darwin. They did a gig at an ice cream parlour in Chorley in April. So there are ways of doing it. It's about being creative and thinking, how can I do this in a way that is most me? I think one problem that artists struggle with is that they find, so for example, one band that I find get ripped off quite a lot are Queens of the Stone Age. There are loads and loads of music that I receive where the riff is effectively a faux Josh Homme riff. And that's great, but we already have Queens of the Stone Age. We don't need another one, and they're wonderful, but we don't need 2 of them. But what artists should do instead is to try and find what makes them an individual, and then allow that to not just be a part of the music, but infect everything that they do. So it's about kind of perfecting a real individuality and letting that seeping into the entire operation. It's not just about the music, and I think that is the real crux of how to make the movement as quick as possible, to progress as quickly as possible, because then you're not competing with anyone else. You're only you're entirely forging your own path, and that's the only way you're going to really get noticed, as far as I can tell.
So, yeah, I want to talk to you about sustaining a music career. Yeah.
I was always just a singer, and I rode on the coattails of that, oh, I'm just a singer, until I wasn't the youngest and prettiest in the room anymore. And then I had to very quickly learn to do sound tech and become a social media analyst and write good press reports and review and all these other things. So I think jump the gun for yourself. Don't just ride the coattails of some talent, and don't be a big fish in a small pond. Always compare yourself to much bigger circles than you're likely to come across in where I grew up, like Kendall or Chipping or the places I've been.
There's two really good points there already. One, I was talking about before, Marianne, this is the portfolio career. You could do lots of different things. They're different facets of the same diamond, basically, aren't they? So if you're a creative person, you can be creative across lots of different fields. And the other thing you were saying is really important is actually creating your own jobs. You're not sitting there looking like for jobs to apply for or careers you can have. You actually just come up with an idea and you make it work. So it's very DIY, but also doing it together, I guess, those two things.
Yeah, 100%. The main ways I make money now, I didn't even know were jobs. Probably naively. When I was 16, I didn't even know I wanted to do music, to be honest. I did a politics degree, so don't shoot me for that. But like, most of the money I make now, just being crude, is writing songs for other people, for the dance world, essentially. So like dance music and dance vocalists. I didn't know that was a job when I was 16, 17. And now it's my main source of income. I didn't know you could set up your own music festival. I didn't know you could actually teach music without having a teaching qualification. So all of these things, I think, just come from being open to learning. Never think you've finished learning. Never think never get comfy, I guess. I think there's a difference between being really successful on Spotify and on digital platforms, and then in the live space. For example, one of my projects, Lowe's, had a good couple of years where we had like 1 million monthly listeners on Spotify, loads of radio play. We were getting played on Radio 1 like 7-8 times a day for ages and ages. And we struggled to pull more than 50 people to a show that wasn't just in this space here. At home, we do okay. We can get a sort of 500 cap venue, get that busy, but beyond the sort of pearly gates of Lancashire, despite those stats, we were really struggling to make a career out of it. So, there's bands doing really, really well and making a lot more money who might, on paper, they might have 20,000 monthly listeners or not getting much radio play at all, but they've really worked the live circuit. And I'd argue they're probably more sustainable, those careers.
So my name's Jamie Turner. I'm the managing director of a company called Actual Music. My background is as a performer, so I studied at LIPA, graduated in 2012, and started my journey as a keys player and producing records. So I worked in Liverpool, stayed in Liverpool for some time, and then moved to my hometown of Blackburn a few years back, and we've been doing quite a lot of work. In recent times, earlier this year, we did an artist development program, which was focused on 8 high potential Lancashire artists. That covered the breadth of Lancashire. So that was very much a professional development program, and the production of assets, so single produced start to finish, videos, images, and so on. we take quite a pragmatic approach to sustainable careers, in the sense that, so I do some work with universities, have good links with RNCM and LIPA. I'm also involved in music as entertainment, so a company called Musique, which is basically an arm of Actual Music, and also an education CIC called SoMe Academy. So I've kind of got toes dipped in the whole sort of picture, really, from education, early years onwards, and sort of in the professional development space too. So a lot of the stuff that we talk about with students and graduates is around, how do you make this sustainable? Making your own music isn't just difficult to earn money from, it also costs a lot of money. So, there's artists here today who are thinking that there's a big gulf between where they're at now and sort of some of the stuff that's been talked about around the revenue generation side. That we talk about practical ways of generating revenue as a musician, such as teaching, which has been discussed, and also gigging, session gigs, function gigs, and those sorts of things. And it's this sort of means of generating the revenue, portfolio career. So it's the same sort of concept, but crucially that those other income streams, those other revenue streams, are contributing to the development of the artistry, building your connections with fellow musicians, and putting you in those spaces and creating sort of little networks of thought and resources, a resource bank to draw upon. And that's something, since moving back to Lancashire, we're still actively working with musicians who are based in the bigger cities of the region, Liverpool and Manchester. But there's also lots of examples of individuals, young-ish musicians, 20s and 30s and 40s, who are having sustainable and successful careers by performing, writing, producing music. Those people do exist. And they are in Lancashire, and I think the work that Tony and others are trying to do to bring that scene closer together and to connect those dots in these sort of, as you mentioned, disparate, mill towns and also rural areas in Lancashire, should be applauded. And I think there's a lot more work that we can do on that.
So that's key word as well, connections. And it's even if it's different styles of music or people doing different things, people should connect with each other, shouldn't they?
Yeah, it's often sort of different sides of the same coin. Again, it may be working across multiple areas as well. I mean, as an organisation, we're genre agnostic. So, for example, the artist development programme that we ran featured artists from all walks of life, all areas of Lancashire, all genres, and everybody. I mean, we created such a fantastic community of individuals, some of whom are here today, and the sort of the feeling and the sentiment that was developed in that, everybody found that there was so much in common, that everybody spoke so passionately about being a Lancashire artist, about Lancashire being a part of their identity. And even though there perhaps isn't that sound, that sort of common thread that sort of runs through the artistic side, there is much that we can learn from each other in terms of identity, I think, and what it means to be from Lancashire and a creative and a performer.
It's like a bento box of identities, music industry. What genre are you? How do you identify? And I think it's, excuse the expression, it's a load of bollocks. That people are telling you should be this just so that you can, it's just like a supermarket, where do you put the tin of beans? It goes over there and down that category, down that. Fair enough, it's great for finding something, but it doesn't identify you. Identity is not even complete until maybe, if you ever get to be 80, 90 years old, that's when your identity might be getting complete.
So how have you sustained your music? Because you've had like, sometimes you played You played pretty big bands over the years, and then there's bits where you don't play big bands. So how do you sustain it over the years, you know?
Well, let me explain that, because that's a very good point, John. And also to introduce my friend Chris Joyce here, who was one of my mentors in a band called Simply Red. He's the drummer in Simply Red, needs to be pointed out. And I joined Simply Red in 1987, and Chris taught me a lot about music industry and about being an artist and about how you need to survive being an artist. You know, that it's not just like, you play, I'm a guitarist first and foremost and a composer, but to just play is not enough. It's business, and you've got to develop business ethics. You've got to develop professionalism. You've got to be somewhere on time. Don't piss people off. I mean, if you see my gig right now, I'm like Flavor Flav. I'm carrying around a huge digital clock I bought off Amazon, about this big, just so I get on stage on time and I get off the stage on time, and not annoy anybody, and let the festival or the venue or the event that's took ages organising and bands rehearsing their sets, that you don't mess things up. That's called professionalism. The sustainability has come through adapting to environment, to the changes that happen, not having a bias in music, because music shouldn't have prejudice. It should be all there for you to enjoy. Because there are so many, there was one good point in the earlier panels about collaboration. That collaboration is a route, that when you collaborate with other people and stop pretending you're better than everybody else, it opens you up to a diverser audience. It leads to creativity. It pushes you in directions. I believe that this approach to thinking of audience first, I think that's a very good point about how you sustain your career, is to think about audience. That you can go on stage and be me, and my art, but if you've cleared the dance floor like Alice Cooper, I don't know whether the approach is right, that you have to take in account. At the end of the day, somebody's buying a ticket, regardless of how much they paid. You should be giving value for money. You should have integrity to give back what people pay for. So it's not just Lancashire. The source is Lancashire, the heritage, the inspiration, but the reach is global. That you can be successful just doing what you do in your bedroom, but as long as you concentrate on what you do, you can diversify, fine, but focus on what you really shine at.
I think it's having the confidence for starters, and this is probably where it's not about money, and it's just about what you do and what you think you want to do. Yeah, somebody mentioned it before about just do it. You know what I mean? So if you've got a band, if you've got nowhere to play, go knocking on doors. Somebody will let you play. You know, if somebody won't book you, set up your own gigs and then promote that. You learn a lot of things, but it's got to come, well, if you're an artist, it's got to come from a desire to get your work out. And you still won't probably be thinking about the money. And in many ways, the money's a hard thing, because somebody would say, it depends what success looks like to you. So for a lot of artists, if they really boil it down, they want to stand on stage and have people sort of appreciate their playing. And that's a really good, because that'll make you better. And then some people might say, I just want to write a song. I don't even want to be on stage. I want people to hear my song and maybe like it. I just want to write songs and write songs better. There's probably many examples of bands and artists just doing the music that they do. And you keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going. Yes, there's an industry, Aziz is right. But to play that industry game, the only thing a lot of the industry care about is how much money you can make them. And that, for artists, is a different conversation, because that's a game as well. And it's a difficult skill. My goal was, what could I do? It was a love of hip hop. I wanted to get hip hop out as far and wide as possible. It wasn't money, or I wasn't worried about paying bills. But believe it or not, paying bills as well as good for an art. It's good for an artist because that will give you focus. But if all you care about is the art, that's fine as well. But you've got to be honest with yourself. If all you care about with the art, hate to say it, relationships don't matter. The money doesn't matter. Whether you had a bath in the morning doesn't matter. Whether you fall out with who you're working with because you're so focused on the project, that doesn't matter. What matters is what you produce at the end and whether it actually is good. It's got your dream.